Hi, my name is Bhagwan Chaudhary. I am a professor of finance at the Indian School of Business, ISB. Today, I'm speaking with Kanika Mahajan, who teaches economics at Ashoka University, and my colleague Shekhar, who teaches economics at ISB. Kanika and Shekhar have come up with this great idea. The idea is that everyone talks about data. We want to know GDP, we want to know inflation, but guess what? We have to wait, and we have to wait a lot until all the data is collected, and it takes usually 2 or 3 months or sometimes longer to find out what the GDP numbers are and what the inflation numbers are. They are telling us that they can scan the data in real time and tell us what's going on. So, Shekhar, why don't you start and tell us what this project is all about?
Thank you, Bhagwan. Nice to be talking with you again about this project. So what we are doing here is, since the lockdown started, there was a big discussion in the media and otherwise in the policy circle as well, that the supply chains have broken down in the country. So as you know that the economy was locked down and there was some trade allowed in the essential commodities. So the food was part of essential commodities, but there was still a lot of discussion about that the supply chains have broken. And what people were essentially talking about was based on mandi level arrivals. So farmers sell their produce at the mandi, and then there is a big supply chain before it actually arrives at the customer level or at the retail point. So everyone was talking about, okay, the arrivals have fallen at the mandis. So we wanted to check, okay, is that really true and can we do it or not? So now the important point is we don't have very good data at the retail level on the arrivals. But for this particular exercise, what we instead decided to do is why not use big data, which is online data. And this has been a project which I've been running for a long time now. So we have been collecting online prices data from a couple of retailers. And so we talked with Kanika and we said, okay, why don't we look at this data and see whether we see some action at the customer point as well. So that's how the project actually started. In normal times, we were only looking at the prices. And so this data was essentially used to look at, okay, how good are we at telling the inflation number for this day or this month? And we saw that although people talk about that online market is very different from offline market, but in terms of prices, it's very good. You know, the markets are interconnected. It's not that the online guys are going and buying their products from Maldives. They're also buying from the same mandis, from the same markets. So the prices move very well. And we are much ahead of the government agencies. So we already know what the inflation is going to be.
Okay,
So this
on there for a second. You're saying something really cool. You're saying that you are going to scrape this data in real time and you will be able to measure and predict inflation almost before the government data is released. So, for example, you were telling me earlier that the government didn't calculate the inflation numbers for April. And you're saying with your data, you may be able to tell us before we get the official data. Is that right?
so that's true. So there is another scoop here. So normally we are ahead of the government by 1.5 months. But this time, because of the pandemic, the public officials were not going out into the markets and finding out the prices. So the government didn't release the retail inflation number for April. And they also released a very curtailed version of the wholesale inflation. So we are flying blind in terms of policy. And then we have all these reports that supply chains have broken, and we don't know whether they have actually broken down or not. So
Okay,
that's
so
where
for a second, Shekhar. Now, supply chain, when you talk about it, uh, that talks about whether or not the goods are moving. So that's not talking about prices. So for that, you need to know whether the goods are actually moving or not. So quantities. So do we have that data, Kanika? Are you able to figure out what the quantities are?
So what the online data shows us is whether or not a product is available. So online data tells you whether a product is stocked out or whether it's still in stock and consumers can buy that product. So you can you can't measure the quantities in terms of the kgs of quantities, but you can measure the extensive margin of availability of a quantity, right? And that can be used to arrive at what happened to availability of different types of subcategories of food in the online retail market during the period when the first lockdown was put in place suddenly. So that's the first objective, to be able to use this data which has been scraped and which tells you the price and the availability of a product, because price is only available for a product which is available today
Okay.
website retailer.
Okay,
And
so
you can use
let me
that.
make sure I
Yes.
understand this insight. The insight is that usually we want to measure quantity. So we want to measure how many trucks are moving across the states or not. But you're saying if the product is not available, that usually was available, that's already an indication of that something is not working. And you can
Exactly.
infer from it that there must have been supply chain disruptions. Is that correct?
Yes, we can infer from it that there have been some disruption, right? Now, of course, as economists would talk about that there could be demand or supply disruptions, and we also tease that out in our analysis, how to get around identifying which part of the market is playing a role.
Okay, so the supply and demand part is if the product is not available, one might wonder, is it not available because nobody wants to buy it, or nobody has money to buy it, or nobody's going out to buy it, or is it really that it hasn't arrived in the stores? And you say you can tease it out. What do you mean by tease it out? How can you tell?
So what we do is that we make use of, so we have data for 3 cities, which we've looked at. So we have data for Delhi, Kolkata, and Chennai. And we know for 2 subcategories of the commodities, the fruits and vegetables, and for edible oils. So for example, for fruits and vegetables, we know how the production is spread around the country, right? So we know onions are produced more in Maharashtra. We know potatoes are produced more in UP. And we know that potatoes are produced in UP, and hence, they're closer to Delhi than onions are to Delhi. And we use the production patterns existing in the country, pre-existing in the country, get an index of distance from each retail center to the production zones for each of these commodities. And we find that retail center, so if a production of a commodity is near to a retail center, then the reduction in availability of that commodity is reduced by almost half.
More, it is just more. So that's suggestive that it must be a supply related. So this is.
So if potatoes are produced near to Delhi, the supply of potatoes has not really gone down for different varieties, but for onions it has gone down.
Yeah.
Because they are produced farther from Delhi. So that's just an example, and we've done that for all the commodities in our data, and we see a significant effect.
So it's actually even
kind
more
of like
interesting.
you guys are like detectives. You're using statistical data, and you're saying, well, if it's really far, then it must be this. If it's really close, it must be this. And that allows you to infer that this is not really related to that people don't want it. It must be something related to disruption. Yeah.
In fact, Shekhar, to talk about the edible oils.
I'll just add a point about edible oils. So in case of edible oils, we are doing a much better job because we can track where these edible oils are actually manufactured. So we actually have plant level data. And so what we find is that the edible oil brands which go out of stock in Delhi are actually produced far away from Delhi, not nearby. So in this whole supply chain idea, I think what is also more important is due to these kind of lockdowns, trucks are not coming from very far away.
Yeah.
So in the local area, there's still a lot of demand. So trucks are going back and forth. But if it's too far, then the truck guy doesn't know whether he can go back taking something from Delhi or not. So that is how we think it was operating in the market.
I think it's very clever what you have done. So let's see what you find. Are you going to show us some results?
Yes.
So there is some work which also tells you whether we have recovered from this shock or not. So what Kanika will show you now is, whether we have recovered or not. And so remember, the fruits and vegetables are perishables,
Yeah.
and edible oils are non-perishables. So we are going to see different stories playing out here. So
Ah,
for the edible oils, what we are seeing is because it's perishable, you don't care after putting it in a truck whether it reaches after 2 days or 5 days or 10 days. So you are going to find that edible oils are finally arriving in Delhi.
I see.
But for fruits and vegetables, it's much more difficult. Kanika, do you want to show
I'm
the
just
graph?
sharing it. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So here is the graph for the mean availability for fruits and vegetables. So we have two types of commodities being plotted here. They've been divided by the initial listing. So the purple line are the commodities which had initial high listing. So for example, if onions are always available in a particular city before the lockdown, so they are the high listing ones. And if there are other commodities which are less available on an average in the pre-lockdown period, they are represented by this yellow line here. And we track the movements separately for these two lines because we think that the supply chain disruptions can be different for these two types of commodities. So if you were a high listing commodity to begin with in the pre-lockdown period, you are likely to have stronger supply chains with the retailer as compared to commodities which had a lower average availability in the pre-lockdown period. And look what we find. So as we enter into the first lockdown period, there is a drastic fall in the availability of commodities amongst these fruits and vegetables who had a low listing to begin with. So commodities which had a low supply chain or a less robust supply chain to begin with show the steep fall, and it persists. So even after the second lockdown starts, they really haven't recovered. They haven't really started going back.
Okay, Kanika. So now tell me why this is not a demand story. Because I could say things that are not so crucial, onions and tomatoes are very important. So everybody wants to buy them. But whether you want to have grapes or not is not so critical. And now that we are in lockdown, I still want onions, but I don't want grapes. So why is this not a demand story, and why is it a supply story?
So one thing is that these are not measured at the commodity level, this high listing, low listing. It's measured at the variety level. So even within tomatoes and within onions, you have different varieties coming in, right? So if you have different varieties, say local hybrid for tomatoes, or for onions, you have 5 types of onions which could possibly be made available. So this division first is made on the basis of variety, not on the basis of the commodity. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second, why should the demand for the low listing variety fall while for the high listing variety be the same? If there's hoarding happening after the lockdown, we should have seen a fall for here as well, right? It's similar fall here, but there is no hoarding story happening here. And the demand story, while I don't think that it fits here, because why should the variation be different?
Because
there's
it's an income
also
shock.
another reason.
So I'm arguing it's an income shock, that these green ones are non-essentials, and while I'm trying to conserve my money, I still want to have potatoes and tomatoes, but I'll cut down on grapes and melons and stuff like that. Because it's a supply chain story that has to do with trucks not being able to move from one state to the other. Why should that make any difference for tomatoes versus grapes?
Bhagwan, so as Kanika said in the beginning, so the high and low is within the commodity. So it's grapes of different types. So the high and low is decided at the commodity level.
Oh,
it's not really across.
Okay.
And the second part is this is online retail market. So most of these people are buying online. It's people like you and me, so who probably didn't have a income shock right at the beginning. And I think this is also very crucial. So for the demand story to hold, the income should really go down. So for the people buying online, I don't think their incomes went down immediately after 10 days.
I see.
So, and then if you look at the oil, I think that precisely pins it down because the supply recovers.
Yes. So in the case of edible oils, you again have this difference by initial listing, and you see this fall, for these commodities which were low listing to begin with, but it does come back later, right? And you see an opposite trend for the high listing one. So you see that retailers are actually cleverly adjusting their procurement patterns. So if supply chain for some products is now weaker and I'm not able to procure them, I will increase the procurement of those products which I'm able to buy.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
As soon as I'm able to procure these other products which were initially there, because my initial mix was a clever mix, right? If I've had this initial mix, then that's because I see that such are the preferences in my city, that I have this initial mix of these commodities. So, and immediately, after the midway, between the first and the second lockdown, you find that there is an uptick. And, by the mid of the second lockdown, just at the beginning, you again have the initial product mix, which is being offered by the companies for edible oils.
So this is great. Can I interpret then, by the time second lockdown came, supply chains were beginning to get restored? Is that what we are seeing in this graph?
Yes, we see that for products like oils, which are usually manufactured. So these are processed foods. I think that's very crucial to understand. What's the difference between edible oils and the fruits and vegetables that I showed earlier? So there are two differences. One is that the fruits and vegetables are perishables, right? Whereas edible oils are non-perishables, they can be stocked up. And even if the truck has been stuck for 10 days, the oil in the truck will not get bad, right? The truck can move in after 10 days and the supply is going to be restored. But if you were to think about fruits and vegetables, if a truck has been stuck for 10 days, and a truck of tomatoes, there is no way you're going to recover the losses because they would have gone bad. So if you have, the perishables are the ones which continue to have, disruptions, and, they've really not gone back to their pre-lockdown levels, right? You just don't see them anywhere or even beginning to go back to their pre-lockdown levels, which shows that the disruptions for products like fruits and vegetables continue, and there are transportation hurdles from the farm to the consumer because they are being procured real time, right? Farmers are growing vegetables real time. They are being procured in the same week. They are being sent because we hardly have any warehousing for these perishables. So that I think is one of the crucial differences which lead to these differential patterns across these two types of commodities.
I see. I would have thought that because of the perishables, the distance between farm to home is smaller, that those supply chains would have been likely less affected because I can always get it from a local farm, whereas edible oil travels from a longer distance, so more chances that trucks did not arrive from Calcutta or from
so this is exactly almost what we are finding. But Bhagwan, irrespective of what people say and the notion that they have about commodity trade in India and the APMC, so we know that there are these issues. But the mangoes from Maharashtra, they travel up north up to Dehradun. So you can find Alfonso in Dehradun, for example. So
if
yes,
there is no supply
and these
chain
kind of
disruption.
so those are the kind of products which are actually being affected. So if you want to buy your dhania, of course, the dhania is only coming locally. Yeah. But a lot of these products are actually distributed all around India, and lack of warehousing facilities or lack of infrastructure in general is hitting us now. So that is another reason why we should have good warehousing facilities.
Okay.
And so we have also thought of like policy implications. Like this kind of a graph is actually very important for policy implications as well. And we were discussing this with Kanika. So if you are a farmer and if you see this kind of a disruption in your supply chain, it potentially means that people are not buying it at the mandis from you, the intermediary traders. So there is oversupply there. So the farmers would probably get lesser price for their produce because they are working in these perishable products mostly.
So would you say that the recent announcements by the finance minister related to agriculture are able to influence some of these difficulties that farmers face?
I mean, it's like I always have on infrastructure the great game between France and Britain. So Napoleon really wanted to invade, and he had like 10 years, but he couldn't build a navy because navy building really takes a lot of time. And so that's where we are stuck on the agriculture front. So it would take a very long time to get those warehousing facilities going. So I think in the future, we would be much better placed in this respect.
Okay. So tell us, Shekhar, about where this project is going. This sounds very exciting to be able to find indices of economic activity in real time, because that will change not only policy, it will also change planning. It will also tell people what to stock, what not to stock. So it has many implications for commerce as well. So what is next in this project?
So ISP and some of other colleagues, we have started building out high frequency indicators for India. And so we should be able to launch it in the next month or so. And so these would be high frequency indicators, both on the consumption side, firm side, uh, agriculture side, banking side. So we are going to see a lot of indicators which we would be constructing and which would be available in real time to help guide the policy making.
That sounds really, really exciting. In fact, we had a discussion with Jayant Sinha, who is the chair of the Parliament Committee on Finance. And he, in fact, mentioned that this is a very, very important thing to be able to see what is happening in the country in almost real time. Because that will allow us to plan in terms of how much investments to make, where are the holes. So we should be able to go back to Mr. Sinha and say, we are ready for some of these things. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
So, Kanika, now you are in Sonipat near Delhi, and you, Shekhar, are sitting in Hyderabad. This lockdown doesn't seem to have affected your productivity. You guys seem to be working together well. Is that the case?
Yeah. Shekhar, you answer the question.
No, I'm really delighted to see this partnership amongst academics, which is quite common. But now that we have more advances in technology, we are able to reach out to more people, even more so. Is there a final thought both of you have that you would like our viewers to know about? Kanika, you can go first.
I think it's time now to use online data and so much rich data we have available online in many aspects of the economy, including what Shekhar has been doing so far, and I see huge scope for this data, and we need to find out ways to be able to make use of it. And be able to make use of it for making intelligent policy decisions and see where the economy is going, because that data is available to us every day.
Right.
Be it data from job portals, be it data from banking, or data from retail that Shekhar is collecting. There is huge potential, and there is potential for partnership with even private organizations if they're willing to come on board. So I would say that one should think in that direction, in which we don't have to do it, in a manner that that researchers are doing it, but doing it in partnership with private organizations, and which can be just a partnership. So that's the way forward, I think we can think about.
So people are usually hooked to CNBC watching stock price data, but you're saying we can see macroeconomic data of real activity,
Yes,
because
you
stock
can.
prices are some of many things. But if you can look at things at a disaggregated level and see what's happening to economic activity by region, by industry, and even by variety of products, that gives us much richer information. Is that right,
But
Shekhar?
yeah.
I mean, think of this issue. Everyone is talking about distress in the farming community, but we don't know how the distress is going to come. Or should we target the farmers who are growing sugarcane, or should we target the farmers who are growing oil seeds, or the farmers who are supplying vegetables and fruits? So right now we know that there are fruits and vegetable farmers who are probably not able to send their supplies to Delhi. So in that sense, if you think it is giving a real it's a time driven information, it's very important, you can use it right away. And I mean, India had a very rich tradition in terms of statistics. Like in the 50s, we were actually the pioneer when, I mean, we set up all the statistical systems in India, and then we lost some way in the middle. But now again, I think with the new online big data coming in, I think India can really leapfrog, help its policy making. And I mean, even for the industry, I don't think that our industry is using data so much, but there's so much of publicly available data that we can actually improve and leapfrog very fast using this kind of analysis and data.
So we look forward to seeing more projects in Jumpstart India at ISB, and we would love to see more collaboration between different academics across India and across the world. So I look forward to speaking both of you in a month and see what more insights you can give us about, are we coming out of this mess, and are the supply chains restored, and where the economic activity is taking place and where it is still stuck. So thank you, Kanika. Thank you, Shekhar, very much for your insights.